With a soaring tenor, Clyde McPhatter bridged gospel, R&B, and early rock. Founder of the Drifters, former Domino's lead, and solo pioneer, he shaped modern soul. Yet despite timeless hits, he died broke and forgotten. This is the story of a legend erased too soon, the voice behind soul's birth. Clyde Lensley McPhatter was born on November 15, 1932, in Durham, North Carolina, a city known for its tobacco factories and bustling black neighborhoods. His father, a Baptist minister, and his mother raised their children in a home where faith and music intertwined. Like many great soul singers, Clyde's earliest stage was the church. As a young boy, his crystalline tenor voice floated above the congregation at services, catching the attention of anyone who heard it. In the gospel choirs of Durham, Clyde's gift was undeniable. His voice wasn't just high and pure. It was filled with raw feeling, a blend of vulnerability and power that would later define his career. The McPhatter family lived modestly. The Great Depression and segregation made life difficult for African Americans in the South, and Clyde's parents worked tirelessly to keep food on the table. Music became Clyde's escape. Singing wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline. He learned early that his voice could earn praise, comfort, and sometimes even pocket money. By the time he was a teenager, he had already made up his mind. Music would be his future. When the family relocated to Harlem, New York, Clyde entered a world that was alive with jazz clubs, gospel choirs, and the street corner harmonies of doo-wop groups. Harlem in the 1940s and early 1950s was a cultural hotbed, a place where young black talent could be discovered. Clyde quickly joined the Mount Lebanon Singers, a well-known gospel group, and honed his skills as a lead tenor. His singing was not only technically impressive, but emotionally gripping, and soon he was standing out even among talented peers. It was in Harlem that Clyde's career took its first major turn. In 1950, he auditioned for Billy Ward and the Dominoes, one of the most polished and professional R&B groups of the era. Billy Ward, a demanding and sometimes harsh leader, was known for his strict discipline and for molding young singers into stars. Clyde was brought in to replace the departing lead, and with his arrival, the group's sound reached new heights. With McPhatter at the microphone, the Dominoes scored a series of hits. Songs like Do Something For Me and Have Mercy Baby showcased his soaring tenor, blending gospel passion with rhythm and blues grit. Have Mercy Baby, in particular, became a #1 R&B hit in 1952 and established Clyde as a force. Audiences were struck by how youthful and urgent his voice sounded. It was spiritual and streetwise at the same time. But success came with tension. Billy Ward controlled the group with an iron fist, often taking the lion's share of credit and profits. Clyde, despite being the voice behind their hits, was paid poorly and treated as just another member. He began to grow frustrated, realizing that his talent was too big to remain in someone else's shadow. That frustration would ultimately push him toward independence. In 1953, after several arguments with Ward, Clyde left the Dominoes. His departure shocked the group's fans, but marked the beginning of his greatest chapter. With support from Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records, Clyde formed a new vocal group called the Drifters. Unlike the Dominoes, this group was designed around Clyde's strengths. The Drifters wasted no time making history. Their debut single, Money Honey, 1953, exploded onto the charts, hitting #1 on the R&B chart and becoming a crossover success. The song's blend of doo-wop harmonies and Clyde's pleading tenor resonated with both black and white audiences, signaling a new era in popular music. Follow-up hits like Such a Night and Honey Love further cemented their place as one of the most exciting acts of the early 1950s. Clyde McPhatter was now more than just a gospel-trained tenor. He was a pioneer, bridging the gap between the sacred and the secular, between gospel's emotional depth and rhythm and blues's street-smart swagger. With the Drifters, he helped lay the foundation for what would become modern soul music. Yet, just as quickly as success arrived, change came again. In 1954, Clyde was drafted into the U.S. Army, forcing him to step away from the group he had just built. The Drifters continued with new singers, but without Clyde's voice at the helm, they struggled to maintain their original magic. For Clyde, however, the interruption was only temporary. The stage was already set for him to embark on a solo career that would define his legacy. At the close of this first act in his life, Clyde McPhatter had already achieved what most singers only dream of. He had been the golden voice of two landmark groups and had charted multiple hits before the age of 23. But his greatest triumphs and greatest struggles were still to come. When Clyde McPhatter returned from military service in 1954, he stood at a crossroads in his career and life. Already known as the golden voice behind Billy Ward and the Dominoes, and as the founder of the Drifters, Clyde was ready to step into the spotlight alone. Signing with Atlantic Records, he quickly proved himself not just a group singer, but a solo star in his own right. His first major release, Treasure of Love in 1956, showcased everything that made him unique. A soaring tenor drenched in gospel fire but polished enough for mainstream audiences. The song shot to #1 on the R&B charts and crossed over to the Billboard pop charts. A remarkable feat in a segregated America where few black artists were allowed space on white radio. McPhatter's voice transcended those barriers. It was vulnerable yet powerful, intimate yet grand, and audiences of all races felt its pull. Following this breakthrough, Clyde released a stream of hits that defined his golden era. Without Love, There Is Nothing revealed his capacity for deep emotion, while I Told Myself a Lie carried the heartbreak of lost love. In 1958, A Lover's Question, written by Brooke Benton, became a signature anthem, topping the R&B chart and breaking into the top 10 of the pop chart. With every song, Clyde delivered performances that felt lived in, not just sung. He didn't interpret lyrics, he embodied them. His recordings during this period helped earn him the title Father of Soul, because long before Sam Cooke or Marvin Gaye, McPhatter had already fused gospel's passion with rhythm and blues grit to create something new. Critics marveled at his clarity, his phrasing, and his ability to soar into falsetto without ever losing control. Fellow singers studied him closely. Elvis Presley credited Clyde's records as inspiration, Jackie Wilson carried his lessons into his own flamboyant style, and Sam Cooke admitted Clyde's crossover success made his own leap from gospel to pop possible. Touring across the United States, McPhatter filled theaters and ballrooms, captivating audiences with a stage presence as magnetic as his records. His shows were often groundbreaking in another sense, too. They drew racially mixed crowds, unusual for the 1950s, proving music's power to bridge divides. White teenagers who had never heard gospel-rooted R&B before suddenly found themselves in tears or on their feet dancing, while black audiences saw in Clyde a symbol of pride and excellence. At the height of his fame, Atlantic promoted him as one of its crown jewels, and his versatility kept him from being pigeonholed. He moved effortlessly from romantic ballads to up-tempo R&B numbers, sometimes even experimenting with rockabilly textures, and each time his tenor anchored the performance. His adaptability helped broaden his appeal, but also made him difficult to categorize, which in retrospect was part of his genius. He was inventing a sound too new for the industry to fully label. By the late 1950s, McPhatter was at the peak of his powers. He had become that rare figure who had led two legendary groups and then surpassed them with a solo career filled with million-selling records. For a brief but brilliant moment, his voice defined American popular music, paving the way for Motown's rise in the next decade. Yet even as he enjoyed his golden years, the seeds of future struggles were already being sown. Exploitative contracts, poor financial management, and personal demons hovered in the background, waiting to dim his light. But in those years, between Treasure of Love and A Lover's Question, Clyde McPhatter was untouchable. The tenor who could make jukeboxes weep, Radios rejoice, and audiences believe in the sheer transformative power of song. By the early 1960s, Clyde McPhatter had already achieved what most singers could only dream of: chart-topping hits as a solo star, a legacy with the Drifters, and respect as one of the pioneers of soul. Yet just as quickly as he had risen, his fortunes began to fade. After leaving Atlantic Records, he signed with Mercury Records, where he initially managed to sustain momentum with songs like Lover Please, which became a top 10 pop hit in 1962. But the consistency of his earlier years was gone. The new decade brought shifting musical tastes. Motown's polished soul and the British invasion's fresh energy dominated the charts. Clyde, once ahead of his time, now found himself struggling to keep pace in a world that was moving on. His problem wasn't only the changing industry. Clyde himself was battling demons that would come to define his later years. Alcohol, once a way to ease the pressure of constant touring and recording, became a daily crutch. As his drinking worsened, his voice began to suffer. The clear, soaring tenor that once brought audiences to tears started to sound weary, uneven, sometimes unreliable. Promoters noticed, fans noticed, and record labels noticed. Invitations slowed, recording opportunities dwindled, and Clyde's reputation as one of the most reliable singers in the business began to unravel. At the same time, his personal life was marked by instability. McPhatter had multiple relationships and fathered several children, but his constant absence, infidelity, and struggles with addiction left his family life fractured. Friends recalled a man who seemed increasingly lost, bouncing between moments of brilliance and long stretches of despair. He was only in his 30s, yet he carried himself like someone already burned out by fame. Financially, things were just as bleak. Despite selling millions of records over the years, Clyde never saw the wealth that should have accompanied such success. Like many black artists of his generation, he had signed exploitative contracts that stripped him of publishing rights and royalties. By the time the IRS came after him for unpaid taxes, there was little left to take. Reports suggest that at various points, Clyde was forced to borrow money just to cover basic expenses, a devastating irony for a man whose voice had filled jukeboxes across America. By the late 1960s, Clyde was largely relegated to smaller venues, package tours, and revival shows, often sharing the stage with other stars whose glory days were behind them. He was still admired by loyal fans, but to the wider public, his name was fading into history. Younger audiences were dancing to the Supremes, the Temptations, and the Beatles, while Clyde McPhatter was increasingly seen as a relic of an earlier era. The psychological toll of this decline was immense. He confided to friends that he felt forgotten, abandoned by an industry he had helped build. He lamented that his contributions were being erased, that others were reaping rewards from a foundation he had laid. This sense of bitterness and loneliness fed his drinking even further, creating a vicious cycle that his body could not withstand. Tragedy struck in 1972. At just 39 years old, Clyde McPhatter died of complications related to heart, liver, and kidney disease, conditions exacerbated by years of heavy alcohol use. For someone who had once seemed larger than life, his death was shockingly quiet. There were no grand tributes, no industry-wide mourning, no national headlines celebrating the man who had shaped modern music. Instead, he was buried almost anonymously, with few resources and little acknowledgement from the very system that had profited so greatly from his talent. For many fans, the news of his death was not even widely known until years later. In the end, Clyde McPhatter's decline was not just a personal tragedy, but a reflection of the era's cruel realities. Black artists who had paved the way for rock and soul were often discarded once their hits dried up. Exploited financially, denied recognition, and left to battle personal demons alone, they became cautionary tales rather than celebrated icons. Clyde's story fits this pattern too perfectly. an extraordinary gift reduced to silence, a pioneer abandoned by the very culture he had shaped. Looking back, it's hard not to feel the injustice. This was the man whose voice defined the early sound of Atlantic Records, whose innovation with the Drifters helped create the template for doo-wop and soul, whose solo records inspired Elvis, Jackie Wilson, and Sam Cooke. Yet at his death, he was remembered by few and honored by fewer. The decline of Clyde McPhatter was not inevitable. It was the result of exploitation, neglect, and the brutal indifference of an industry that rewards talent only as long as it generates profit. Today, we recognize him as one of the first great tenors of R&B, but in his lifetime's final years, he was treated as little more than a has-been. His golden voice, once celebrated across America, was silenced too soon, and the man who helped give birth to soul left this world feeling forgotten. Although Clyde McPhatter's life ended in tragedy, his voice never truly disappeared. In the years following his death in 1972, a slow but steady reappraisal began, with musicians, historians, and dedicated fans reminding the world that this fragile tenor had been one of the true architects of American popular music. His recordings with Billy Ward and the Dominoes, his groundbreaking leadership of the Drifters, and his remarkable solo career created a blueprint for modern soul, R&B, and doo-wop. Without Clyde, there would be no smooth transition from gospel into secular pop, no clear path for artists like Sam Cooke, Jackie Wilson, Marvin Gaye, or even Elvis Presley to follow. His ability to merge Sunday morning's sacred emotion with Saturday night's secular rhythms set a template that countless performers would adopt and refine. While the industry abandoned him in life, it eventually acknowledged his importance. In 1987, Clyde McPhatter was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, becoming one of the very first solo artists recognized. Later, when the Drifters were inducted in 1988, he became one of the rare performers honored twice, placing him in the same elite company as legends like Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson. These accolades confirmed what fans had always known. Clyde McPhatter wasn't just a singer, he was a pioneer. In the end, Clyde McPhatter was more than just a singer who died too young. He was a pioneer whose voice helped birth a genre, a bridge between gospel and pop, and an influence so profound that even without recognition, his artistry cannot be erased. To listen to Clyde McPhatter today is to hear the very roots of soul itself, to encounter the moment when sacred fire and secular rhythm collided, and to realize that one man, with one remarkable voice, changed the course of music history forever.